the end of the day, whatever I come up with in terms of recommendations, I got to live with the consequences, which is very different, like I said, from the first 20 years of being a consultant. So just quickly, we're one of the oldest companies in Asia. We're 178 years old, so that makes us a little older than the Jardines Group in Hong Kong. So that gives you, so in terms of just history. We have our diversified portfolio, primarily in real estate, financial services, and more recently, telecommunications and business process outsourcing. The thing about our company is that we've struck through 4 core values over those 178 years. And the most important one for us is really the last one on the screen, which is commitment to national development. In any of the companies or sectors that we get into, we always ask the question, is it good for our country? Is there a way that the business that we're getting into is going to help our country grow and achieve economic growth? And so, we have a lot of questions. Do we get into tobacco? Do we get into gambling? Do we get into, and we always ask those questions constantly. But the end of the day is that what's it going to be to the nation? And so that's a very important part of our value system. Some of the highlights, again, I won't read through all this. In terms of revenues, it's in Philippine pesos, but what's important, I guess, is that it's about 3% of the country's GDP is produced by our group. In terms of our combined market cap of all our publicly traded companies, that accounts for around 20% of the Philippines Stock Exchange Index. We have 55,000 employees in the group. We're currently into new pipeline with the government projects in terms of power and infrastructure. And the thing that Cliff keeps on kicking himself is, had he bought our stock on January 1st, he would have been 44% better off from that investment. And as you can see, the Philippine Stock Exchange Index is up 20%, we're up 44%. And that's just our holding company. All our other companies are actually up as well in the high 30s or low 40s. Oh, late breaking news. Yesterday, we had the pleasure of getting the news from Finance Asia that we were just voted the best managed company, best corporate governance, and best in CSR for Asia Pacific yesterday, and we're actually getting the award this week. So, let me give you an overview of our group. Ayala Land is the largest and only full-line property developer. When we say full-line, we do everything from digging into the ground to running a hotel, a mall, or a business, or a building, or selling residential units. BPI is the country's most profitable bank, but it's also the oldest. It's celebrating its 160th year this year. And the little known fact is that we actually used to produce the currency of the country. So again, gives you an idea of how integrated or how integral the company has been in the whole history of our country. Globe Telecoms is the second largest telecommunication company, and it's currently the leader in broadband as well as business-to-business platforms. Manila Water is a water utility. We basically we started out running the east zone of Metro Manila, which serves around 6 million customers. But since then, we've expanded to 4 other geographies in the country, targeting around 15 million customers. And we've also opened recently a deal in Vietnam, and we're looking at Indonesia as well. Our emerging companies are on the right. We have an electronics manufacturing. It's an EMS company, so it's a manufacturing solutions company. We make a lot of the cell phone display screens, for example, or the backup lights for cars. As you're, the later car models now have cameras that are installed in the back of their cars. And so we make a lot of the new. We even have rangefinder for golf balls for the golfers in here that have RFID so that then you can look for them. For Livit is our BPO portfolio, and this is now as you can see, those are global numbers. We're number 5, we're top 5 in terms of customer relationship management, that's call centers. We're number 3 in the KPO, or knowledge process outsourcing. And this is interesting. We actually do a lot of our research for the big investment banks, consulting companies, and do a lot of the client, the back end of the client-facing research is done by our group. And we're also top 3 in graphics design outsourcing. Most of the major newspapers in the world are actually laid out in Manila through our group. And we have an automotive group, but more importantly, we're now into new sectors, which is power and infrastructure. So we're into renewable. We have a wind farm. We're building a solar farm. We have a couple of hydro, run-of-the-river hydro plants, as well as we're into airports, rail, and toll roads. So those are our new sectors. So as you can see, and Jennifer talked about complex, that's, I guess, an understatement when we're saying this is the kind of world we live in, and constantly changing. The thing, for example, about Globe Telecoms is that just when we thought, and this was the comment we had, just when we thought we figured out all the answers, they changed the questions, right? And so the new technology keeps on coming up, and all of a sudden we're dealing with LTE, 4G, and all of these kinds of things. And so we need to retrain engineers. We need to have people that are able to come up with the new technologies. All of that's actually impacting how we develop our leaders. So let me take you to a journey. This is circa August of 2008. And the reason this is significant is that prior to that, I joined in 2005. Prior to my joining, HR was never part of the management committee. We're a very strong financial-oriented company, very heavy into, everybody's financially literate. Everybody's got CFAs or MBAs and all of that. And HR was always on the back burner, if you will. It was really personnel. The large conglomerate, 178 years old. Oh, who's in personnel now, right? Any issues that had to happen or need to be dealt with went to personnel. And so in 2008, lo and behold, after a couple of years on the job, I was invited to their management committee offsite. And basically said, our CEO, Jaime, said, JP, I'd like to invite you, and can you give us an assessment of where you think HR is today, our people? So, given this chance, I said, let's see. I put together this framework, and I said, just to put in the context, again, and our group management committee are 13 CEOs from our different companies, plus our CFO, our head of strategy, and then our chairman and our president. And I said, here's how we look. We have different stakeholders, but I think the group that we really need to focus on is this group on the top, because they're key to our success if we're going to win in this complex, in this changing, complex world. And so I did a survey, and I said, how many people are we talking about? And the number is 435, as you can see on the top right there. And this means 1 down means those are direct reports to the CEO, and 2 downs means those reporting directly to them. So I just limited my discussion of senior executive talent or leadership to that. Whether they're leaders or not is something else. I just said, that's the universe that I wanted to play with. And so I looked at that group, and I said, did you know? It's a busy slide, but let me walk you through it. If we start with the 435 here, I prefer green. 435, that's the people we had in the previous slide, right? 99 of them were retiring in 3 years. So that takes up a quarter of them. And then I said, we have a forced distribution, so 10%, the bottom 10% of that, are those not really meeting performance criteria. That leaves us with potential leaders of 292, of which about 180, again following the bell curve, is our strong people meeting requirements, right? really leaving about 112 who are really our stars. These are the people that are getting the higher performance ratings, and we looked at this historically. I then said, you know what, we might lose 10% of those. That left us with 99. This is the first time, by the way, I'm giving this presentation to the CEOs. And their eyes just grow big, like deer in headlights. They said, what, 99? Then I said, hang on, that's not the end of the story. Let's start with the same 45. And I said, assuming 10% that we just needed to stay still, and grow organic growth, we're talking about another 43. And these are just assumptions. I said another 10%. But let's add another 15% since all of you around the table, this again addressing the CEO, said we needed to grow by an average rate of 15% over the next 3 years. So I had another 15%. But then I asked them, how many real leaders do you need? And they said, another 183. This was, again, asking them just to give me numbers. What that ended up with was 661. So I said, okay, guys, after all your growth aspirations, after all your plans, where the hell are we going to get 450 new leaders over the next 3 years? That's when it became now, hey, we can't just look at numbers. We need to look at where we're going to get the people to deliver those numbers. Our dilemma was that we had excellent managers. We had people that were steeped in their disciplines. We had great engineers. We had great architects and project development managers. We had great bankers. We had people very strong in finance, like I said. We would hire MBAs regularly. Very deep expertise. Unfortunately, for a conglomerate, the way we were, very top-down. While we're public, it's largely still influenced by family. It's still a family corporation. And so while the family members aren't autocratic, there's this deference, I don't know, for those who work with family firms, deference to the family. And that's just ingrained in the nature and the culture. We're very risk averse. People are afraid of making mistakes. And I think partly it's because it's a family company. There's this question of legacy, of stewardship, that they do not want to make sure that they're the generation that screwed things up. So there is that risk aversion, I think, that takes place because it's a family company. And as a result, spreadsheets galore. And I said, if we just had, for every failure we had fantastic spreadsheets to show that those were actually great ideas and those were going to make money. And like I said, we had spreadsheets to show anything we wanted to show. In fact, there's a book, I don't know if you've read it, How to Lie with Statistics. Well, we had the same thing. We could fashion any of the spreadsheets to show whatever we wanted. Our dilemma, like I said, was we had a lot of those, but we didn't have a lot of these. We said in that forum in 2008 that we needed people, because I asked the question, therefore, what do we need? What are the kind of people we're looking for? And this is, again, the CEOs coming with their answers. We need people who are stakeholder savvy, because we're dealing with regulators, we're dealing with government, we're dealing with public, we're dealing with investors, we're dealing with employees, we're dealing with with our customers. There's a whole slew of stakeholders that we just need to have our people are savvy with. We need people who are prudent risk takers, who may not have everything in the spreadsheet, but are willing to make the bet, are willing to take the risk, and are willing to put themselves on the line and say, I'm going to take this bet. This is the risk I'm willing to take. They said we needed people who are effective communicators. people who are skilled change leaders. With the whole complexity question coming at the whole complex world that we were facing, I think that all of us are facing, the question is, how does one constantly change, as Jennifer said? More importantly, how can we be more inclusive? And we really need more inspirational leaders rather than the, I would say, the celebrity CEOs, that when they say, let's jump, everybody asks how high. I think we now needed to have people that can actually inspire the workforce. And most importantly, this again came from our CEOs, we needed people who were passionate about serving their customers. So I said, hell, where are we going to get those? In fact, for those who are familiar with the profiles, we actually just took, and this is just a segue, Leap 1 basically are those who are our direct reports, our one downs, and Leap 2 are already the second layers down. And if you look at their profiles, still very strong in the reactive tendencies, as you can see below, especially the Leap 1 here. Very strong in terms of controlling, but yet still very high in terms of systems awareness and achieving. So there's a lot of, the gifts are there. I think the question is, how does one turn? And the question really that we keep on asking is, what got them here maybe won't get them there. And that was the dilemma that we kept on repeating to ourselves. Some interesting anecdotes, though, maybe just to share. While we have spent millions and millions of dollars in man-hours on training and development, when we came to the very senior leadership team, very few have actually risen to the top. In fact, 60% of our group management committee came in as external hires, present company included. And I even told my chairman, HR should be something that is internally developed. Why are we getting from the outside? Because that was me in the interview. That's another story. But I think the important thing is that we really weren't developing leaders that we wanted, that we needed in the organization. We never had a formal succession process. Succession decisions were usually made within 3 to 6 months of a person retiring. I almost likened it to the selection of the Pope, where people got together in a room and say, okay, who's going to take over now that this guy is going to retire in the next 3 to 6 months? And then that's when divine intervention happens, right? And you come to think, who do we put on tap now? And the funny part is most of the time, the shortlisted candidates, whoever we were sort of like grooming for it, all of a sudden would say, they're not ready. They don't have what it's got, what we need. And so the question comes really, so what have we been spending all this time for? Values was never an issue. They always said that, we needed more proactive instincts, we needed stronger entrepreneurial spirit, we needed strong EQ. But I said, but I thought that we've been spending millions on training and leadership programs and development and all of that. Why aren't they ready? In fact, I even pointed out we had a flawed development strategy because we kept on saying we needed leaders with a global mindset, but yet none of our companies were exposing them to to other geographies or to global businesses or anything like that. So I said, by definition, we can't develop global managers if we don't give them a global milieu to play in. So this is circa 2008. So what we decided for the very first time is that we actually crafted a talent philosophy. And I won't go into it, but I think the most important thing is the first bullet. Talent is a driver to our business growth. This is the first time, like I said, that talent became front and center of our agenda. And we set up goals. We said we needed a succession plan. We needed to have more focused programs for our leaders. We needed to develop a leadership pipeline. And this was now something that we set in 2008, which is, like I said, setting the stage for LEAP. Specifically, we also talked about what are the aspirational outcomes. We said we needed to define our own leadership brand and culture, that there is such a thing as an Ayala leader. And in fact, we wanted people to aspire to be considered an Ayala leader, or people from the outside wanting to join us because they wanted to be a member of that exclusive group. We basically took what they said we needed and said, this is really what our guideposts are going to be. You saw this slide earlier. We needed people with stakeholder savvy, who are prudent risk takers, who are effective communicators and skilled change leaders, who are passionate about delighting our customers. And really, the last one just came in by our chairman. I don't know if you've read Michael Porter's recent articles about creating shared value, which is, it's not enough to just be satisfying shareholders and investors. We need to make sure that we're giving back to our communities that we're serving. And so creating that shared value with the communities we serve is very important for us. We wanted to encourage open and constructive. Remember, this is a group that's very autocratic, never had any 360 mechanism in the past, and now we're inviting feedback. Major cultural shift. Openness to experiment and innovate. And we basically said it's important that we give people space to experiment and to fail. Because in the past, failure was not an option. In this case, we encourage failure. In fact, we encourage early failure. The earlier in the process that they fail, the better, because then we can make course adjustments. What we did not want was to have the catastrophic failure towards the end. Conduct regular dialogue with customers, and establish more diverse management committees. Again, these were all what we've put together in that 2008 offsite retreat. So, with that, my HR team came up, and we developed what we call our own competency framework. This was before we met Cliff and the TLC guys, right? So we created our own competency framework. Some of the things that probably highlight on the column on the left about strategic and business thinking, decision making with courage, which is really the authenticity anchor that we're looking at in the leadership circle, as well as planning and visioning and innovation. If you look at the second column there, there's a lot about that creating shared values, about stakeholder management, really about partnership and building. So it's the whole relating and really looking at systems thinking. If you look at execution of excellence, which is our third bucket there, we're really talking about process discipline, intelligent risk-taking, change management. So you can see a lot of the words that they had said in that whole retreat found its way into our competency framework. Because at the end of the day, we said this is what we needed to do to use to assess our leaders on how they were ready for taking on the future business challenges. You might note that at the base of that whole pyramid or structure is the whole personal effectiveness and leadership by example. Because we did say that you need to be role models. You need to be the kind of leaders that people aspire to be. And this was a tough challenge. Again, coming from a very egocentric type of organization in the past. Cliff asked me to talk about this, and I usually like to talk in the we rather than the me. But then Cliff asked me to talk about my own dilemma. And maybe just to share a bit here. Basically, I said, well, that's great. First of all, I said, that's great that HR is finally front and center of the agenda, of the business agenda. But the reality is I looked around and I said, who's going to help me here? We can't get there with the current systems that we had in place. I didn't have the capabilities in HR to do this, to pull this off. None of the domestic companies that I know of could. The multinationals, sure, we had people from Procter & Gamble, we had people from IBM. Many of the multinationals had figured this out. But as a local company, we needed to build things, or we needed to come up with something very different. As a culture, like I said, we're not very comfortable with embracing vulnerability. We always had that, you know, that presence that said we knew what we were doing. Nobody could question us. It's very Asian, if you know. Face is important. And so just to admit that we were vulnerable, that we had weak spots, that we needed to get to be more customer-centric, required a lot of self-reflection and disclosure, which people were uncomfortable with. And really, my role, as I saw it, was really to be the coach of the CEOs, to push them and to coach them and to try to make sure that we were moving in one direction and that they bought into the whole vision. I was essentially going to have to take a lot of risk. In fact, I had asked Jaime, our chairman, I said, do you really want to go down this path? Because if we're going down this path, we can't go back. And I think a lot of because we are going to change the culture. We are going to change by that time, 175-year-old company and make it a little bit more nimble and a little bit more inclusive. The lucky thing was many of the CEOs were actually on that same dilemma. That how are we going